story of Upbuild began in a monastery. On our quest to understand ourselves more deeply, we recognize that it is our attachment to our egos, our identities, that gets in the way of being our true selves. This podcast will help you understand your ego. It will help you better understand your inner world, the motivations, insecurities, and emotions that affect your every action and relationship. Welcome to Upbuilding the Self. Hi, Rasanath. Hi, Michael.
Hey, Vipin.
Hey, Vipin.
I'm excited to be with you today. How are you guys both doing?
Doing well. I was just sharing how my daughter woke up today morning talking about one particular word that we're going to be speaking about in the podcast today. And it was just like a energizing element. She just like started with that word. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is exciting and encouraging to what is to come for today.
You want to tell us what is the word?
And somehow she woke up today morning saying chameleon, because she's been trying to pronounce this word and she didn't get it right. And today morning, that was the first thing that stuck in her mind. And she said, chameleon. I know how to say chameleon. And I thought, oh, wow, that you can't just make that stuff up.
That's amazing.
Right. So today we're going to talk about being a chameleon. And yeah, that is crazy that your daughter woke up with that word on her lips. Some synchronicity there. And I have two reference points to kick us off in this conversation. The first is a business school memory that I have. I don't remember what class this was because I wasn't taking it myself, but a friend of mine, I remember him emerging from a second year elective class, really excited about the subject they had just discussed, which was all about personas in the professional world. And he had identified himself or had been identified as a chameleon. And I remember him he'd come out of the class, there were 4 or 5 of us around, and he had shared this with us with great pride, as if he had newly discovered himself and his ability to change colors and fit in with all different types of people to get them comfortable with him and to trust him. So in this reference, chameleon was a good thing. It was in business school, of course, and context matters. So that was one reference. And the second reference is in our Enneagram workshop. The Enneagram, we often talk about it at Upbuild, is a personality typology that we frequently work with. And there's a lot more on our website related to the Enneagram. But for one particular type, the type 3, which is also known as the achiever, at average levels of awareness or health, one of their key attributes is to be chameleonic. So in this reference, chameleonic is not so good. And why? And so last night I was looking up chameleon in the dictionary, and Merriam-Webster describes why quite well. The second definition under chameleon is a person who often changes his or her beliefs or behavior in order to please others or to succeed. I thought, wow, that captures it quite well. So not dissimilar from the business school reference, but certainly a less positive connotation. So before we get into whether it's good or bad to be chameleonic, I want to ask you both, what's important about this topic to begin with?
There is a difference between adaptability and being chameleonic. And sometimes they're conflated. We feel like they're the same, and they also might look the same from the outside. But adaptability has a sense of, I don't change who I am. I change how I communicate something so that more people can truly understand who I am. And chameleonic has a very different flavor to it, where I just can change who I am to fit my environment so that I can win people over. I can make people believe a certain message. So what came to my mind is that it's so important to draw the distinction between the two because one has a certain component of authenticity. Your adaptability is not at the cost of your authenticity. Whereas when you are a chameleon or you exhibit chameleonic behavior, it can very well be at the cost of your authenticity.
And for me, the reason why this topic is important is because I've been in that gray area between being a chameleon and being adaptable, or maybe much more in the area of being a chameleon, I think my whole life. And just like your business school friend, Bipin, I've worn this as a bit of a badge of honor. It's been, there's various terms for it, right? I'm a Renaissance man. I'm good at lots of different things, or I'm good at reading the room is another term that people use to describe the advantages of being chameleonic. And so there's a lot of misunderstanding. And I think hopefully we can start to clear some of that up as we go through our conversation today.
Okay, great. This is great. I want to come back to what Rasnath mentioned about the distinction between chameleonic and adaptability. But before we do that, I want to hear more from you, Michael, about, first of all, why do many of us think chameleonic is a good thing? You mentioned this, that you wore it as a badge of honor. Can you share more about that? What was your perspective?
Well, you shared it in your definition with the Merriam-Webster definition. Pleasing to people, or what are the effects? Pleasing to people and success. And so the results are quite positive often. It ends up being, I can connect with a lot of different people. I get the responses that I'm looking for. I tend to get the things in life that I'm looking for.
Yeah. But are those results because you're being chameleonic?
That's the story.
Yeah.
As I was hearing both of you talk, there is one other thing, again, speaking from my own experience of, playing games where the other person can't read you, but you can read you can read the room. And there is an excitement in playing that game in life where, I can just go to different environments. I can just play the game that environment requires for me to play and win. And there is a way in which it feels very self-aggrandizing when I can play that repeatedly again and again. And yeah, I can just see life as that game and play it every day, which also, I think, on a very subtle level, creates an excitement about being a chameleon.
Yeah. So let's hear some specific examples from your lives when you were being chameleonic. I'd just love to get some really specific examples of what this looks like. I mean, I can share something from myself. I remember being in high school. And first of all, for most up until that point, including high school, being an awkward nerd type of character, and then just figuring certain things out in high school about how to navigate the social structures. And I remember by my senior year, talking to my friend about how I figured out how this whole thing works. And I know how to get myself into various crowds and feeling like I'd cracked it. That was like I wouldn't have associated it with being chameleonic, but that was an example for me of I understand the system and I can morph myself to fit in different places. And I'm quite pleased with myself as a result of that. So that's an example for me. I'd love to hear some examples from you guys just to make this really concrete for people.
I very distinctly remember in 6th grade winning a prize for an extemporaneous speech, half of which was not real. And then basically, after the whole thing was over, telling the audience how real this was. And the audience was just so impressed with it. That reinforced a certain way of working in the world as I moved forward in my life. I have done that in interviews where I have said things so convincingly and have told stories that are real enough, but not fully real, and seen the interviewer really impressed with what I said and walking away feeling like, look how good I am at this game.
you're uncovering a really important point here, which is inherent in what you're saying is to be chameleonic is to have to bend the truth or outright lie. And I think the question is like, well, is that chameleonic or is that just being untruthful or lying? What is the difference between those, or is it one and the same?
So it depends on what the definition of lying is. Now, this is where it gets really gray. And Michael, you said that you've spent a lot of time in that gray zone. When I stretch the truth a little bit, it doesn't feel like I'm lying. It's just that, it's a rounding error, but I can round it off so well. And that's why I said it had to have enough elements of reality in it so that when I can round it, I just round it to the next highest number. But there is some stretching that's happening there. And that's we do that so often, and it just feels like I'm just approximating it. But it's not an approximation. In some ways, it's intentional. It's intentionally trying to portray myself as being better, bigger than who I am, and getting that extra glint in somebody's eyes. And then what happens is that becomes reality. And I've seen this in myself. The rounding becomes reality. So then what happens next time? You round it to the next highest.
Yeah, you have to keep rounding up.
Right? Because now I've reached level 1. So now my baseline of reality has shifted, right? And I've convinced myself that that's reality. Now, then, you round it up even further. This is where it gets really tricky.
One of the things that's coming up in my mind from my history is how I was in college and being a party boy. I was in a fraternity, and I think I had a pretty good reputation for being a very high quality party guy. And
I'm seeing you're choosing your words carefully there.
I mean, good at partying. I mean, somebody who loved partying. And I did not. I was uncomfortable with that whole lifestyle. But given how much time I spent doing it and the smile on my face, and it wasn't that I didn't have fun in many situations, I did, but there was an emptiness that pervaded that whole experience, not only because partying can often be an empty experience, but because I distinctly felt that I was doing something that was different than what would be aligned with who I really am. But it didn't matter. The validation and what I was getting from it was such a strong drug that I was able to do it for a long period of time. And that, to me, that discomfort between what would be aligned with who I actually am versus how am I really spending my time is a good way to see how am I being chameleonic.
Okay, this is another really important point. So what you're saying is when we are being chameleonic, we are moving further away, often further away from who we are innately. And because of our attention is so much on the experience of others and their validation, we can lose ourselves in the process. And even what you're saying is, even though you might have felt that, it was still hard to stop because of all of the validation you were receiving. And you may continue to operate that way because it becomes part of your own perception of this is actually who I am, potentially.
That's right. Hari Prasad, our fourth partner, always talks about a self on top of a self. And this is what was happening. There was a self, and then, and as Razanath just shared, it's like I'm pushing it 1 degree, and I get so far away that if you ask me who I am, I don't know. How am I supposed to answer that question?
And typically the response is, well, who do you want me to be? I'm not explicitly asking that question. But what will it take for me? What will it take for you to say, I'm the best person you've ever met? Right. And that's all that matters.
And chameleons are so adept to their audience. This is such a key part of it, because I need to be aware of what does this other person value? Is it sports? Is it art? Is it emotional depth and feeling? Is it partying? Sort of what aspect would this person, and I bring up all of those specific things as ones that are personally relatable for me. And then I can play to my audience as a result of that awareness.
But what about the fact that all of those pieces are elements of yourself also? They're elements of your personality. Like you said, you may not have been as much of a party boy as you showed up as, but you enjoyed those interactions as well. There were elements of you that felt aligned with that potentially. So what about the idea that, hey, in an audience where this is valued, that will naturally amplify that part of me. And so it is important to connect with different people. And what I'm doing really is building connection. I'm not trying to just pretend I'm somebody who I'm not. What would you say to that? Or is that the story the chameleon tells himself?
You've painted the story that the chameleons want to tell. You've given enough ammunition there.
What's wrong with that story? Actually, like, please help dismantle it.
The thing is, when I truly love something, how I speak about it has a quality of the heart. And if that person were to, again, when I speak about that, that doesn't necessarily negate the other parts of me. Maybe it's highlighted because there is a certain connection that gets created because a part of me really loves a particular sport and I can really speak about it. But what is not missing is the quality of the heart. And you can see authenticity in the expression. Now, what a chameleon can do is learn how to speak about something and also have an arsenal of interesting things that over time I've gathered. Even when my heart doesn't feel connected to something, I realize it's a means to an end, right? So I read magazines, I read books to have enough information and get myself excited. Not because I'm naturally excited, but because then I can go and talk about this with someone, and that will make me like move forward on what I really want to move forward.
I'm more excited about the potential impact than the underlying content.
And that's the difference. When truly authentic, the underlying content excites me. Even if someone is not seeing me, I'm still excited about it.
Yes.
I invest in it.
A big part of this is how am I being seen? The attention is always on how am I being seen?
How am I being seen? How am I being received?
How am I being received?
And again, when we come to adaptability, we can talk about that very thing.
Distinction. Okay.
Right. So to me, that's the qualitative difference between those parts of me that are naturally invested in something versus those parts of me that have been artificially developed as a means to an end.
Okay, great. And actually, when you're talking about the heart there, that is felt on the other side, even if the person may not have the language to speak about it that way, the experience is very different.
Transmitted, yes,
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So before just we get to adaptability, one more question, which is, and Michael, you alluded to this a little bit. So there's some perceived benefits potentially of being chameleonic, but what are the costs? Like in no uncertain terms, what are we missing when we show up that way? What are the costs for us?
Well, first of all, what you guys were just speaking about, there's a sense, even if I can't quite put it into words, there's a sense on the other side that I'm not getting the full picture, that this isn't the full story, or that this isn't truly who this other person is. And so how can I really be connected to somebody else if there's a gap in trust here, especially if there's a gap in trust that I can't articulate? So the first thing, and maybe the most major thing, is that there's just less connection, less genuine connection with others.
I was going to say to that point, there is a very strong performative element. You can feel it. And while you may still be impressed and you may like the person because of the performative element, you don't know who the person is. And there is a difference when you can deeply connect with someone and know the person versus you actually see the person's performance. That's one part. Michael, did you have anything else?
Well, the other thing I was going to say is that not only is it trust between myself and somebody else, but it's also how much can I trust myself? If I'm trying to be all these different things to different people and create a self on top of a self, then how do I know what I like? How do I know who I am? And one of the major costs of that is I spend a lot of energy and time doing things without an understanding of my underlying intention for doing those things. And so I'm focused on the wrong things that are taking me away from my real self.
Michael, you spoke about the emptiness when one starts to become more and more chameleonic. And that emptiness is actually a very lonely place. Now, what happens with that kind of emptiness as it starts to form is, in order to fill that emptiness, I have to go out and do more of the performance, because that's the only way I can not feel empty anymore, because I don't know who I am. I'm only what others see me as. So I have to keep performing and performing and performing. But when I'm alone, when I'm with myself, there's just this like real emptiness that descends, and it's very painful to live there. That's the suffering that starts to manifest, along with what you said. Over time, a certain lack of trust. People stop taking you seriously. It's just like, when you're in front of somebody who is going to sell you something.
Yes, very good.
And sometimes they may buy things not because they're interested in the product, but they buy things because they see your desperation. Sometimes they buy things because that way you leave them alone. But people are like on guard because you just become like a salesperson.
This is really helpful, connecting it to the fact that as a chameleon, we always have to be selling something, because as we move further away from who we actually are, we need to sell a different story that's inherent in sort of changing colors and shape to fit.
To me, it's unfortunate talking about this way, because I don't necessarily view sales as inherently a negative thing. I think sales is when you're naturally excited about something. That excitement just conveys to other people that they should participate in this experience. But the connotation to a salesperson is, I can sell anything to anyone.
Right.
Right. And when I'm on the receiving end of being sold to, at the back of my mind, I'm always thinking, well, what's this person selling me that I actually don't want?
Yeah. Well, there are many expressions like this, like, right, a good salesperson can sell water to a fish. I mean, the whole idea is if you're really good at doing this, then I should be able to sell, like you said, anything to anyone, including selling myself to any other group.
That's right.
That's exactly what I was going to say. With a chameleon, there's actually only one product. The single product that I'm trying to sell is myself.
And typically the response is, well, what are you not telling me?
Right. Well, the one thing that I have noticed is often for someone who's being chameleonic, the feeling is it's working. Obviously, if it weren't working, you wouldn't keep pursuing the strategy, because being chameleonic is really a strategy. And so it feels like it's working. But on the other side, repeatedly, whether in coaching sessions or 360-degree reviews, the feeling on the other side is, I can't quite put my finger on it, but I just have a hard time really getting to the person. I don't really know what I'm getting. And it's the feeling of interacting with someone who I can't quite pin down. I don't know who they are. And so, yes, it just leaves a little bit of a barrier. Michael talked about connection. Also, you guys both have talked about trust. And again, I might still, in a professional setting, be interacting in a way that doesn't reveal to the other person that that's how I feel, but that's what I'm carrying. And it does affect not only that relationship, but it affects relationships across an organization.
Thank you for expanding on that. What a chameleon really benefits from is the ambiguity. And what happens is the ambiguity keeps people guessing. They don't know what is true. It's a sense that something is not fully there, but I don't know what it is. But in that time period, I can actually sell multiple times. This is the thing. I can get away in that time window. I can get away. And by the time, somebody actually recognizes, I can go somewhere else and do the same thing. It's almost like a magician. When you're going for a magic show, you know you're going to get tricked. It's funny. And I think what happens is, that there is something unusual, and the magician also enjoys the fact that that there is something unusual, but you can't pin it down. You don't know what it is, which is why you don't come. This is the thing. I don't let you come too close to the stage, right? Your vantage point, my vantage point, is also important for me, because from that vantage point, I can keep the veneer alive. But when you come too close, I can't. Right. And that's exactly the experience that you have with someone who's chameleonic. As soon as I come too close,
I see my true colors.
You may see my true colors. I'm petrified of that. I'm really concerned about that, which means I will keep a distance, enough of a distance where that ambiguity, and dare I say, the intrigue.
Yes, the mystery.
The mystery is kept very alive. Right. And that's part of the smoke too. It's mysterious.
Well, as you were talking, I was thinking, you were talking about the magic show, which is a great metaphor here. I was thinking also, I've felt in my life, I enjoy the mystery. I enjoy that people can't actually figure me out. So I just continue to propagate that. And I think the other thing you're saying here about the vantage point and the distance is so powerful, because it connects right back to the point Michael had shared earlier around connection. So not only does the receiver not feel there's a gap in connectivity, but for the chameleon, him or herself, it's like, I actually am intentionally needing to keep that boundary there, because that is what allows me to sustain this image.
And what's interesting is it begins in a very uncalculated fashion. It's not, and when somebody is thinking about and listening to as we're speaking, it's like, wow, that sounds so devious, right? Now, it's not as devious when it starts. It's much more innocent, but that's the challenge. The challenge is that when I let it pass as innocent, that's when it starts to become a routine. And then when I start to enjoy the routine, that's where it's starting to step into dangerous territory now, where now it's I play the game intentionally because I get a kick out of it. I start to admire how good I am at playing the game. And now it starts to get devious. And by that time, I'm just so impressed with myself that I don't even see this as being a character flaw. And when people can see that about myself, it's actually very painful, because there's truth to it, which is also one of the reasons why I want to keep that distance, because I don't want to see this about myself.
Yeah. I was thinking about, well, it can feel like, well, I'm winning over here and I'm winning over there. And so this is, that, and then I want to keep winning. So I will keep doing what's been working, and in the process can lose myself. What happens to the winning? If it's working and I keep winning, there's really nothing to stop me from operating this way. If I'm winning in this group and I'm getting what I want and people are impressed and I'm succeeding, does it take a crash? Like, how does that fall apart before I start to unwind that nature? Yeah, Michael.
We are all looking for intimacy. We're all looking for that connection of the heart. So even for people who are really chameleonic and really good at being chameleonic, there's still a sense, whether they're paying attention to it or not, that I want intimacy. And so when I go for that, I can't get it. I run into areas where I'm not succeeding. That might be romantic relationships, or it might be genuine friendship where I feel like this person has my back. And so I start looking at some of these areas and I see that I'm coming up short, but there's still a strong impulse as a human being, as a soul, to want those things. And I think that's where some of the cracks can start to happen.
I agree. Winning is a substitute for love and connection. That validation is one way in which love is expressed. Now, I over-index and fixate on the validation so strongly and make that my life, and I substitute genuine love connection for winning. Now, the challenge that happens, and this is very, I would say, as I think about it, it really gives me chills, because I play the game so many times and internally I just feel so empty, because what people love is not the real me, but an image. And in order to get the little bit of love that I so desperately crave, I have to keep this image alive. And I just back myself into a corner where at a certain point, I can't even free myself from the images that I have created. And at the same time, I'm dying out of emptiness inside. And that's the place where it really crashes. Now, typically, what people tend to do at that time is, this is called reinvention, right? I'm going to reinvent myself. And while that is perhaps, yes, freeing myself from the trap, I'm still not fully honest about what I did to myself, right? Which, if I don't learn the full lesson in the process of reinventing, I can probably, unfortunately, do the same thing. And the challenge is that there is just so much shame that has accumulated. I don't even know how to retrace my steps, because if I do, the amount of shame that I have to experience with people seeing that what I put forth was actually some distorted version of truth. Will people receive me? Will people ever forgive me? I'm so afraid that I have to, I just stay trapped. I can't really fully take account of what I have done to my own life. And the loss of authenticity that happens in the process is very, very painful.
Yeah, you sobered me up here real fast. I was thinking earlier as you were talking that I think there are many times in my life where I would have said, yeah, you know what, but I'll take winning over intimacy. I'll make that trade, and I feel fine about it, especially depending on the scope of the winning. But as you kept on talking, I felt quite sober about that idea. Thank you for bringing that dose.
It's being alone. It's being alone on the top. It's being alone on the top, right? I have built this ivory tower, but I'm just a prisoner. There is no one actually with me there. And when I'm getting there, or when I feel like, yeah, I mean, that's not going to be such a big deal. I'll be totally fine being there by myself. And when we get there, is when we recognize, wow, that's such a lonely place.
Mm-hmm.
We also don't feel like we're at the top.
That's true. That is true.
It's never enough. So it becomes this empty and continuous quest for more. Because if I'm not being the real thing, then I'm never going to be satisfied. We talk about in our workshop, the heart being the seat of appreciation. And because in this whole chameleonic quest, I've disconnected from my heart, that even when I do get to the top or get all the validation that I'm looking for, it doesn't actually land in my being. It doesn't truly affect me in the way that I hoped it would be. It doesn't enter my heart. And so I feel like I need to get the next hit of validation. I feel like I need to get the next promotion, the next big payday, the next look in the person's eyes who I'm trying to win over in some way, romantic or otherwise.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So before we complete this discussion, I want to return back to this close cousin of chameleonic that Rasanath, you mentioned early in our discussion, which was adaptability. and the difference, the distinction between being chameleonic and being adaptable. So can you share a bit more about how would you define adaptability versus everything we've been talking about around chameleonic?
The basic idea behind adaptability is that who I am deep down as a person, my values don't change. How I express them in different environments changes based on how people are able to understand me as a person. So while I may use a different language or a different metaphor or a different way of explaining to someone, who I have to start from that person's vantage point, from that person's reference, and bring them in, I'm not shifting who I am to impress this person. Right? I want this person to know who I am deep down inside, and I will bring that person in versus me just becoming something that that person just admires. That's the difference between adaptability and chameleonic.
So in closing here, I think the last question I would ask you both to share on is, how do we move from chameleonic to adaptable?
The first place to start is to really watch where I'm stretching the truth to fit in, or to get the validation that I need, and really taking account of when that's happening and why that's happening, and to not be so charmed and excited about the win, but also focus on, well, how did I win?
Just one simple question is, what am I trying to prove? Or how do I want this other person or these group of people to see me? And if I can ask myself that with increasing frequency and increasing willingness to tell the truth around that answer, we start to get at our real intentions. And then once we see those, we can start shifting from I'm trying to prove or sell myself to somebody else to I'm adapting for the benefit of others in order to serve them.
And at the base of all of it is we have to desire authenticity, because the loss of trust with other people over time, and more importantly, just the loss of my own self in that chameleonic pattern is very expensive. Sometimes it's almost unrecoverable. And we do not want to go there, do not want to step on that slippery slope, which is why that desire to stay connected with our authentic self is so important and is the baseline for the shift.
Wonderful. Wow. Thank you both so much for this conversation. I feel like I'm walking away more in touch with my own chameleonic tendencies. And I will ask you both, because you're such an important part of my life, to call me out if you see me veering in these directions, because I think I need help. We all need help. And I really appreciate the nuance with which you shared your wisdom here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I need the same. I need that accountability in my life. And I'm also afraid of that accountability, which tells me more that I need it.
And thank you, Vipin, for guiding this discussion as you have. It was beautiful.
Thank you both. Thank you for listening to Upbuilding the Self. Upbuild is a leadership development company that offers workshops, coaching, and other services to help you on the path towards being your best self, free from the shackles of the ego. To learn more about our work, visit our website, upbuild.com, and sign up for our newsletter to gain access to podcasts, reflections, and upcoming events. If you enjoyed this episode, please go to iTunes to leave us a review so that others can find and benefit from the podcast. We look forward to being with you again next time.